Alan Wake 2 is one of those games that deserve to have a photo mode right from the start. The atmospheric horror has an outstanding visual style to match its unique storytelling. But Remedy made us wait, even despite the enduring popularity of Control with in-game photographers.
The dictionary definition of the word is an enthusiast, a fervent devotee.
The new photo mode was worth waiting for though, and Alan Wake 2 benefits from a much more comprehensive photographic setup than the one we saw in Control. As always, understanding how it all works is the first step. So here is the Alan Wake 2 photo mode, explained from my perspective as a photographer to make it easier for you to capture great shots. After finding your way into the photo mode via the pause menu, there's no shortcut button sadly, the first thing you'll actually see is a list of 5 preset modes. These change several other settings in the photo mode to set up the camera for a specific type of shot. Landscape equips a 16mm lens with a wide-angled field of view along with an aperture f-stop value of f11 and focus distance of 50 meters for a deep depth of field. As the name suggests, this preset is ideal for shots of the environment with a lot of the scene kept in sharp focus. With another clue in the name, the Portrait preset recreates a setup typically used by real-world portrait photographers. An 85mm lens offers you a much narrower field of view to help isolate the subject, and a wide open aperture f-stop of f1.0 gives a very shallow depth of field with a soft and blurry background. The focus is set to 3 meters, which is a bit too far from my preferred framing at 85mm, but you can obviously change that by tweaking the manual settings. Macro increases the lens focal length to 100mm while setting the aperture to f0.4 and focus distance to 1 meter for close-up shots with an ultra-shallow depth of field. This preset will probably just give you an entirely blurry image at first, but you just need to move the camera closer to the subject to find the point of focus. Evidence Photo uses a fairly normal camera lens setup with a focal length of 50mm and aperture of f8, but combines it with the Polaroid frame to give the look of an instant camera photograph. The camera flash is also activated to give a bright illumination of nearby subjects, or indeed victims. The final preset relates to the game's story a little by using the Alice Photo frame and the Dark Presence filter to recreate the inverted black and white style of Alice Wake's photographs of the Dark Place. That's Alan's wife, in case you're wondering. On the photo mode camera, Remedy have included 2 separate movement modes, with the first being a completely free camera that is moved forwards, backwards, left and right using the left stick, and turned through full 360-degree pan and tilt with the right stick. The L2 and R2 triggers will move it up and down vertically, while a full range of roll is available on the camera tab of the UI. In this mode, the camera has a large range of movement, but just be aware that collisions can be a problem and you might find the camera getting stuck somewhere occasionally. A click on L3 toggles the camera into the optional orbit mode, which will always aim towards the playable character as it moves around them in a circular orbit using the right stick. Although the camera position can be offset slightly with the left stick, this is naturally a more restricted mode, but it can be handy as a way to explore different portrait angles. The lens setting is the camera's zoom and changes the visible field of view. A shorter lens length provides a wide angle that will take in more of the surroundings but also cause greater perspective distortion. A long lens zooms in, narrowing the field of view and compressing the perceived distance between the foreground and the background while also isolating the subject. F-stop controls the depth of field, i.e. how much of the scene appears in acceptable focus, and is given in aperture f numbers. These behave just as they do on a real camera lens, with smaller f numbers like f1.0 simulating a wide aperture with a shallow depth of field and strong bokeh blur. Larger f-stops like f14 simulate a small aperture with a much deeper depth of field that keeps more of the scene in focus. Focus itself is set with a distance value that moves the point of sharp focus closer to or further from the camera, obviously used to focus the camera at the correct distance to the desired subject. Autofocus is also available by clicking R3. This will try to snap the focus onto a central subject and can be useful to get approximate focus as you move the camera around. In my experience though, it's not very reliable and you will get better results by focusing the camera manually. As a useful tip, you can try making additional fine adjustments to the focus by carefully moving the camera forwards or backwards after setting a fixed focus distance. Exposure affects the brightness of the image using a scale from -3 to +3. Negative values make the image darker and positive values make it lighter. Pay particular attention to the way that this setting has a strong effect on the highlights and creates a broad bloom that spreads outward from bright light sources. A fairly lengthy list of post-process effects is headed up by 6 colour filters. These mainly offer subtle changes that shift the atmosphere of an area rather than dramatically altering its colour. The one exception there is the dark presence filter, which applies an inverted black and white style. Saturation changes the strength and intensity of the on-screen colours. Increasing this will make colours stronger and more vivid. Decreasing it will make colours more muted, while a value of 0 will result in a pure black and white shot. Contrast adjusts the difference between dark shadows and bright highlights. Low contrast values flatten the luminosity of the image and shift everything towards a neutral grey, while higher values produce an image with stronger blacks and brighter whites. The brightness effect gives another way to change how bright the image is, and behaves in a different way to the camera exposure. Whereas exposure has a greater influence on the highlights, brightness adjusts the whole image equally by shifting shadows, midtones, and highlights all together. It's worth thinking about using the two together actually. For example, a low exposure with a high brightness can lighten the shot without blowing out the light sources or causing too much bloom. Lens distortion applies a stretch or pinch effect to the image to give an exaggerated sense of an imperfect optical lens and causes straight edges to appear curved. Unlike other settings here, 50 is the neutral value where no distortion is applied. Moving it either up or down will add an increasing amount of barrel or pincushion distortion to the image. Vignette applies a darkening effect around the outer edges of the frame, becoming more opaque and closer to the center as the value is increased. This can be used to replicate the light drop-off that occurs in some camera lenses, or even as a deliberate artistic style that directs attention towards a central subject. Film grain will add a grainy texture to the image to simulate the look of photographic film. Use low values for a cleaner shot, or high values to increase the amount of visible grain. It's usually best not to overuse this, although the right amount of grain can make low light shots appear much more natural and photographically authentic. Another effect that is applied to the outer edges of the image is radial blur, which adds a motion-like blur spreading outwards from the middle. This unusual effect can give the impression of forward motion, or maybe just used to draw attention to the center. As usual, a high number here results in a stronger effect. Perhaps the most interesting effect in this photo mode is fogginess, and that adds an increasing amount of fog to the environment. Starting in the distance at first, the fog gets gradually closer to the camera as the value is increased, until it smothers the scene with a claustrophobic foreboding. It's perfect to emphasize a horror vibe, and works beautifully with light sources, which will give volumetric effects through the fog. Alan Wake 2 features 3 separate custom lights in its photo mode, but if you're hoping that means it's got a full 3-point lighting setup, then you may be slightly disappointed. It's only possible to use one of the 3 lights at any time, with each designed to behave in a different way with specific use cases in mind. Camera flash is a single light that is attached to the camera to obviously replicate the appearance of flash photography. This light cannot be placed anywhere else in the scene and faces in the same direction as the camera by default, though you can adjust its aim direction by tilting it using the left stick. Specifically made for portrait lighting, the portrait spot will shine directly towards the playable character at all times. The distance between the light and the character can be changed using the left stick for more intense close-up lighting or softer light from further away. The right stick orbits the light around them, conveniently altering the direction that the light falls across their face. Wider use is obviously limited here, but it's a very easy way to add some light to a headshot. The final light available is intended to recreate the beam of light from a flashlight or torch, and even includes a reflector pattern in its light spot. This is easily the most versatile of the three, and can be freely placed anywhere in the scene using the left stick and aimed in any direction with the right stick. It can also be the trickiest to use though, mainly because the default position is in front of and above the playable character and facing backwards. Maybe try pulling the camera back for a wider view to make it easier to see the light rig visualization. Each of the three light types benefit from the same selection of settings to adjust how they operate. Intensity controls how bright the selected light is, with higher intensity producing a brighter light that will appear harsher and more defined on a subject. Color changes the hue of the selected light from the default white to one of three alternate colors: red, blue, or yellow. Source radius is effectively the size of the light itself. A larger radius will increase the size of the lamp and hence the width of the beam of light that shines from it. This can be useful to control how much of an object gets lit, or to play around with the size of the flashlight spot to give the impression of it being shone on objects at different distances. Not to be confused with the camera's field of view, the light field of view affects how broadly each custom light shines by changing the angle of its cone of light. Lower values will narrow the beam down to a tight circular spot, and higher values will make a wide beam that covers a larger area with a softer and more diffuse light. After adding your light, be sure to change to a different section of the photo mode menu before capturing the final shot. That's because the visible light rig can sometimes remain on screen and does not get hidden along with the rest of the UI. The final section of this photo mode is dedicated entirely to a selection of frames that includes 4 graphical overlays to give the look of different types of physical photograph. Most of these are the same throughout the game, with the exception of Postcard, which will show a different design depending on where you are. This section also includes some simple aspect ratios that change the visible field of view from 16:9 to a 1:1 square, a 5:4 photo print, or a 2:1 widescreen letterbox. Notice that the vertical field of view is identical in each case, meaning that the 2:1 ratio actually achieves a wider horizontal view than the default 16:9. To wrap things up, there's a few other settings that are mostly visibility toggles, such as the Hide Player found on the Effects tab to show or hide the playable character, while Hide Characters will toggle the visibility of the non-playable characters and enemies. An optional grid divides the image into vertical and horizontal thirds to help with balancing your composition and positioning key elements within the frame. And Hide UI hides the entire photo mode menu for a clearer view of the final image before capture. Notice that it's also possible to fully navigate and adjust all settings while the UI is hidden, as an extremely useful way to get an unobstructed view while changing the settings. One last thing, which is not a feature of the photo mode as such, but something definitely useful to virtual photographers, there is a chapter select option hidden in the Load Save Data menu. This lets you return to any previously unlocked chapter without the need for a full playthrough. That should cover everything you need to know about this photo mode then, and if you found it useful, please do leave a like, a comment, and subscribe to the channel for more virtual photography content.
Good to see you, Alan. Great to see you. Welcome back to the show.